Endless Iowa cornfields, a lonely blacktop road, grain silos catching the last of the light, and one porch light burning in the dark. Out here, you can see for miles in every direction, so how did 10 people just vanish? 10 names. 10 quiet Iowa towns. Not all of them came home. Lock your doors, pull up the map, and let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe. New cases every week. Brooklyn, Iowa, July 18, 2018. Population just under 1,500. The kind of town where everyone knows your name, knows your car, knows your running route. Neighbors wave from porches. Farmers recognize each other's trucks on the county roads. It is, by every measure, the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. And on a warm Wednesday evening, in the middle of summer, a 20-year-old woman named Molly Tibbetts laced up her shoes, stepped out the front door, and went for a jog. She didn't come back. Let's set the scene exactly, because the geography matters here more than almost anything else. Brooklyn sits in Poweshiek County, roughly 70 miles east of Des Moines, surrounded on every side by working farmland. In late July, the corn is at full height, 8 to 10 feet tall on both sides of the road, pressing right up to the gravel shoulder with almost no gap. The locals call it the blacktop, a straight 2-lane county road that stretches out in both directions until it disappears into the flat horizon. When you're running it in the early evening, those corn walls close the world down to a single strip of sky directly above your head. You can see maybe 50 yards of road ahead and 50 yards behind. But everything else, every ditch, every gap, every person who might be standing just off the edge of the asphalt is swallowed by green. It is one of the most exposed feeling places imaginable, a straight open road with no cover, and simultaneously one of the most concealing landscapes in the country. That contradiction is going to matter throughout this entire video, not just for Molly's case, but for nearly every case on this list. Molly Tibbetts was a psychology major at the University of Iowa, home for the summer and staying at her boyfriend Dalton Jack's house while he worked a construction job up in Dubuque. She was 20 years old, a former high school cross-country runner who still ran regularly, not for a race, but because she genuinely loved it. She was a Taylor Swift fan. She kept a journal. She was, by every account from her family and friends, the kind of person who had her whole life mapped out and couldn't wait to live it. She had a younger brother she was close to, a tight-knit family that checked in with each other regularly, and a social circle that would notice immediately if she went quiet. She had one specific habit when she ran. She put her phone on Do Not Disturb. She didn't want texts interrupting her pace, didn't want notifications pulling her out of whatever headspace the road put her in. It was a small, ordinary habit, something millions of runners do every single day, and it would become one of the most forensically important details in the entire investigation. She left the house sometime after 7:30 in the evening. The neighborhood was quiet. The temperature was still warm but not oppressive, the kind of Iowa summer evening that feels almost perfect for a run once the worst of the afternoon heat has burned off. There was nothing unusual about any of it. No argument beforehand, no distress call, no indication to anyone watching that this was anything other than a routine evening run by a fit young woman who had done this hundreds of times before. She headed toward the blacktop. The corn was at full height. Here's the first sign that something is wrong. The next morning, Molly didn't show up for her job at a local children's day camp. That was deeply out of character. She was responsible and consistent, the kind of employee who showed up on time, who the kids expected to see, who didn't just not appear without a word. Her family called her cell phone. No answer. They tried again. Still nothing. They contacted the police, and officers went to check the house. What they found when they arrived was, in its own way, almost more unsettling than obvious signs of a struggle. Everything looked normal. Her car was parked outside. Her belongings were inside the house. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a disturbance, no note, no indication of where she had gone or why. The phone was gone. The Fitbit she wore on her wrist when she ran was gone. She had left the house on her own 2 feet, apparently voluntarily, on a route she had run dozens of times, and she had simply not come back. Investigators quickly established that Molly's boyfriend, Dalton Jack, had been in Dubuque the entire time and was cleared early in the process. A Snapchat message had appeared to show Molly inside the house during the critical evening window, briefly raising questions about her exact timeline. But when investigators dug into the app's metadata, it didn't fundamentally contradict the jog. The working assumption became what the physical evidence already suggested. She had gone out to run the blacktop, and something had happened on that road. The last person confirmed to have seen Molly Tibbetts alive was her hairdresser, Christina Stewart, who spotted her running at approximately 7:45 in the evening. Molly was wearing black running shorts and a pink sports bra. She was moving at a normal, steady pace, heading down the blacktop, looking exactly like any other runner on any other summer evening. Stewart had no reason to stop. She drove past and kept going. And that is the last confirmed time anyone saw Molly Tibbetts. This is where it stops being normal. Investigators pulled data from both Molly's Fitbit and her cell phone, and what they recovered was something extraordinary, a precise, minute-by-minute digital record of her final movements on that road. The data showed her phone moving at roughly a 10-minute mile pace, perfectly consistent with jogging, from the time she left the house. The signal tracked her route along the blacktop, updating in real time, a quiet digital shadow of a girl running through the corn. And then, at exactly 8:28 in the evening, the phone stopped moving entirely. It sat motionless for approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes on a road where she should have been continuously in motion. 4 minutes with no steps registered, no forward progress. And then it began traveling south at approximately 60 miles per hour. "We knew she can't run that fast," an investigator said publicly, in a line that is both obvious and devastating. "So we knew it had to be in a vehicle." The phone signal continued moving south, away from Brooklyn, through the darkening Poweshiek County countryside, until it went completely silent at 8:53 in the evening, roughly 15 miles south of town. The Fitbit went dark at the same moment. 2 devices, 1 precise timestamp, total silence. Somewhere out in the corn, south of a town of 1,500 people, at 8:53 on a Wednesday evening in July, Molly Tibbetts had been there, and then she wasn't. The road held no record of it. The corn held no record of it. The only thing that registered her presence at all was a satellite ping bouncing off a phone that would never move under its own power again. Now the search machine kicked into gear, and it was enormous. More than 2,300 tips poured in from across Iowa and beyond. Investigators conducted over 500 interviews. They canvassed farms, back roads, grain elevators, and convenience stores for any camera footage that might have captured something, a vehicle, a face, anything. There was a reported sighting at a truck stop in Missouri, a young woman matching Molly's description, and investigators traveled there to run it down. It dissolved into nothing. Volunteers walked the drainage ditches along the blacktop in long lines, pushing into the corn where the rows allowed it. Dogs worked the road shoulders in the heat of August. The search stretched through 1 week, then 2, then 3. Here's what doesn't make sense about those early weeks. This is open country. You can drive the blacktop and see farmhouses from the road. There are intersections with stop signs, driveways with clear sight lines, neighbors who sit on their porches in the evening because that's what you do in Brooklyn, Iowa, in July. And yet, whatever had happened between 8:28 and 8:53 in the evening had been completely invisible to every human being in the area. No one reported seeing a car stopped on the shoulder. No one reported a struggle. No one called in anything unusual at all. The corn, those walls of corn pressing in from both sides of that road, had absorbed an entire abduction without leaving a single human witness behind. The break came from surveillance footage. Investigators went through camera after camera, farmstead security systems, business entrances, road intersections, looking for any vehicle that had traveled Molly's route during her run. And they found one, a car, appearing on multiple cameras, moving along the same roads Molly had been running, at the same pace she was running them, in the same time window. The footage was distant and imperfect in the way rural Iowa camera footage always is, but the pattern was unmistakable once investigators mapped it against her phone data. The car had been following her, deliberately, for blocks. That footage led to a name, and that name led to an arrest, and that suspect led investigators to a cornfield in Poweshiek County on August 21st. 2018, 34 days after Molly disappeared. She had been hidden there, in the corn, concealed by the same landscape that had made her disappearance invisible in the first place. Christian Bahena Rivera was charged and later convicted of first-degree murder. He is serving a life sentence. Molly Tibbetts was found. Her case has a verdict, a conviction, a file that has been officially closed. But stand on that blacktop on any summer evening. Watch those corn walls pressing in from both sides, and the resolution feels like it only answers the smallest part of the question. A car followed a young woman for blocks in a town where everyone knows everyone, and no one saw it happen. 34 days passed before she was found, hidden in a field that could have been reached from the road in minutes. The corn kept that secret without any effort at all. It didn't even have to try. That is what this landscape is capable of. That is the thing to carry with you through every case on this list. At least Molly was found. The next one, a 12-year-old boy, has been gone for over 40 years. He left home before sunrise with his family's dog, and only the dog came back. The dog came home. The boy didn't. That is the single detail about the disappearance of Johnny Gosch that lodges itself somewhere behind your eyes and refuses to leave. Not the abandoned wagon, not the undelivered papers, not the 72-hour institutional delay that still makes investigators and advocates furious 40 years later. Though all of those things matter, and we'll get to every one of them. It's the dog, because the dog knew the route. The dog had done it before. The dog came trotting back through the neighborhood in the pre-dawn dark, alone, and for a little while nobody in that quiet suburban house understood yet what that meant. And then the phone started ringing with complaints about undelivered papers, and John Gosch Sr. walked out the front door to find his son, and the meaning of it landed like something physical. Let's back up to the beginning, because the geography and the timing of this case are everything. West Des Moines, Iowa. September 5th, 1982. A Sunday morning, which in paperboy terms meant the heaviest delivery day of the week, the Sunday Des Moines Register, thick with inserts and supplements, the kind of edition that required a full wagon and a deliberate, unhurried route to distribute properly. The neighborhood was a quiet residential suburb on the west side of the metro. Cul-de-sacs, ranch houses, trimmed lawns, the kind of development built in the post-war decades when the American idea of safety was a locked front door and a known neighbor on every side. It was still fully dark at 6 in the morning. It would be dark for another hour at least. The streetlights were burning yellow-orange over the empty asphalt. The houses were closed and quiet, and 12-year-old John David Gosch came out of his family's front door, attached the family's miniature dachshund, Gretchen, to a leash, loaded his wagon with the morning's papers, and headed out to start his route. He liked building model rockets. He was 12 years old and responsible enough to hold a paper route, responsible enough that his customers had come to rely on him to expect the paper in a specific place by a specific time, to notice immediately when something was off. That reliability is not a small detail. It is one of the things that made the events of that morning so immediately alarming to everyone who knew him. Johnny Gosch did not miss deliveries. He did not sleep in. He did not leave a full wagon sitting on a sidewalk. His route began at the paper drop corner, a few blocks from home, where the bundled Sunday editions would be waiting for him. He would have done this dozens of times, loaded the wagon, clipped the leash to Gretchen's collar, felt the cool September air on his face, and started the familiar walk through streets he knew by heart, past houses whose porch lights he could have navigated in complete darkness. Nothing about the morning was unusual. The neighborhood was asleep. The air was September cool, carrying that particular Midwestern early autumn smell of damp grass and distant exhaust, the sky just beginning to show the faintest gray bruise at the eastern horizon. It was an ordinary Sunday. Everything about it was ordinary. Here's the first sign that something is wrong. Johnny's customers started calling. One by one, phones rang in the Gosch house as the morning wore on and the papers still hadn't arrived. 7 o'clock came. 7:30. People who expected to sit down with the Sunday Register and their morning coffee were picking up their phones with mild irritation, the kind of frustration that evaporates the moment you understand what it actually means. John Gosch Sr. headed out to find his son. What he found, 2 blocks from their home, was Johnny's wagon still sitting exactly where it had been left on the sidewalk. still fully loaded with undelivered Sunday papers, untouched. The wagon hadn't been overturned. Nothing near it was disturbed. There were no signs of a fall, no scattered papers, no broken leash. It was just sitting there, loaded and waiting. Like Johnny had set it down for a moment to deal with something 30 seconds away and had simply never returned to pick it up. Gretchen was not with the wagon. At some point in the events of that morning, the dachshund had made her way home alone, navigating those familiar suburban streets back to the front door, without the boy who had brought her out. The wagon sat in the September morning light, full of papers that would never be delivered, in the middle of a neighborhood that was just beginning to wake up and understand that something was wrong. This is where it stops being normal and where the system, in a way that would change Iowa law forever, made its most catastrophic failure. When John Ghosh Sr. contacted the police, he was not met with immediate mobilization. Because there was no note, no ransom demand, and no obvious physical evidence of violence at the scene, the working assumption from law enforcement was straightforward and, in retrospect, devastating. Johnny had run away. He was 12, they reasoned. Kids run away. It happened all the time. The law as it stood in Iowa in September 1982 allowed effectively required police to wait 72 hours before opening a formal missing persons investigation in cases that didn't present clear evidence of foul play. 72 hours. 3 full days during which a 12-year-old boy with a paper route he had never once failed to complete, a family he had no apparent reason to leave, a dog that had come home without him, and a wagon full of untouched Sunday papers sitting 2 blocks from his house was treated, by administrative procedure, as a potential runaway. 3 days during which anyone who had taken that boy could travel in any direction across a country with no centralized missing children alert system, no mandatory immediate response, no mechanism to push his name and face to law enforcement agencies across state lines with any urgency. John and Noreen Ghosh did not wait for those 72 hours. They began their own search immediately, knocking on every door they could reach, driving the neighborhood grid, calling anyone who might have been outside that morning. And what they found through their own canvassing, not through a police-led investigation, was that people had seen something. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Johnny had been at the paper drop corner that Sunday morning. He had arrived on schedule. He had been there. One of the most significant accounts came from another paperboy working in the area, who reported that he had observed Johnny talking with a man near the paper drop, a stocky adult male, seated in a blue, 2-toned car parked near the corner. The exchange appeared, to the witness at the time, unremarkable. An adult asking a kid something, a brief conversation, the kind of interaction that registers and then immediately fades from memory because nothing about it signals danger in the moment. No license plate was captured. The car was never definitively identified. The man was never found. And that is the last confirmed time anyone saw Johnny Ghosh alive. The critical detail here is the specific combination of what was present and what was absent. Witnesses at the drop corner, a physical description of an unknown adult and a vehicle, a direct interaction between that adult and Johnny, and then a wagon full of papers sitting 2 blocks away, a dog walking home alone, and a boy who was simply gone. No note, no ransom demand, no trail of footprints leading anywhere investigators could follow productively. Just a clean suburban street, a specific corner, a car that had been there and then wasn't, and a child who had been there and then wasn't, and no clear account of the transition between those 2 states. Here's what doesn't make sense, and what makes this case feel so suffocating 40 years later. This was not a remote rural road or a hiking trail far from houses. This was a residential neighborhood with homes on every side, a paper drop corner that multiple carriers used every Sunday morning, a route with regular customers whose windows faced the street. West Des Moines in 1982 was not a ghost town. The morning was moving toward full light. And yet the moment itself, the actual 30 seconds or 2 minutes in which a child went from present to absent, left no witness who could describe it clearly enough to matter. The gap between talking to a man by a blue car and wagon sitting on the sidewalk, dog heading home alone is the entire case. Everything investigators have chased for over 4 decades lives inside that gap. No suspects have ever been arrested. No charges have ever been filed in connection with Johnny's disappearance. His case became one of the first and most visible in the milk carton missing children campaigns of the mid-1980s. His school photo appearing on dairy cartons, distributed across the country, a face staring out from breakfast tables in Iowa and Ohio and California. One of the first times America was asked to look at a missing child over their morning coffee and wonder if they'd seen him. His mother, Noreen, became one of the most determined and publicly vocal advocates for missing children in Iowa history, channeling the failure of those first 72 hours into legislative action. The result was the Johnny Gosch Bill, signed into Iowa law on July 1, 1984, requiring law enforcement to begin investigating missing children cases immediately upon report, with no waiting period whatsoever. No more runaway assumption. No more 3 days of lost ground while a trail goes cold and a car crosses state lines. The law changed. Johnny did not come home. One piece of this case's history requires a specific note. In 1997, Noreen Gosch publicly claimed that Johnny, by then in his late 20s, had appeared at her door in the middle of the night, briefly, accompanied by another young man, saying he was alive but in hiding and couldn't stay. She has described the encounter in detail and maintained the account consistently over the years. It cannot be verified. Johnny's father, John Gosch Sr., has stated publicly that he is not certain whether such a visit actually occurred. Law enforcement has not confirmed it. It is Noreen's account, sincerely and persistently stated, and it is presented here as exactly that her reported claim, unconfirmed, disputed within the family, impossible to evaluate from the outside. It is not presented as fact because it has not been established as fact. What is established? Johnny Gosch was 12 years old. He took his family's dog and his wagon of papers and walked out of his house before sunrise on a Sunday morning in September 1982, and he has not been officially seen since. He would be in his mid-50s today. His case remains technically open. His father has said he believes his son is dead. His mother has said she believes he was alive as recently as the late 1990s. Both are statements of belief, sincerely held, and neither has been confirmed. What has been confirmed is only what the physical evidence preserved: a drop corner, a blue car, a brief conversation, a full wagon, and a small brown dachshund finding her own way home through the empty suburban streets in the early morning quiet. A rising television star would vanish the same way, except she answered the phone first. She told a colleague she was on her way. The parking lot was 100 yards from her front door. Her car was right there, and the sun wasn't even up yet, and she was never seen again. She answered the phone. That is the thing that makes this case so difficult to sit with, even 30 years later. She was awake. She was alert. She was running late for work, which was embarrassing but entirely fixable. She told her producer she had overslept. She said she would be right there. She hung up and grabbed her things. The station was less than a mile away. Her car was in the parking lot directly outside her apartment building. The drive would have taken 4 minutes. She had done it hundreds of times. And somewhere between hanging up that phone and reaching her car door, in the space of a single pre-dawn morning in a quiet Iowa city, Jody Huisentrout vanished so completely that 30 years of investigation have not produced a single charged suspect. Mason City, Iowa. June 27, 1995. Mason City sits in Cerro Gordo County in north-central Iowa, roughly 120 miles north of Des Moines, a mid-sized city of about 30,000. The kind of regional center that feels large enough to have real infrastructure and small enough that a local television anchor is genuinely a recognizable face. KIMT-TV was the CBS affiliate serving the Mason City market, and Jody Huisentrout was its morning news anchor, 27 years old, with a broadcast presence that had already earned her attention from larger markets. She had recently bought herself a red Mazda Miata, a new car, something she was excited about, one of those small personal milestones that mark a life going in the right direction. She lived at the Key Apartments at 600 North Kentucky Avenue, a complex close enough to the station that the commute was almost a formality. Let's establish the timeline exactly, because the precision of it is what makes the gap so vertiginous. Jody was scheduled to anchor the KIMT morning news, which meant she needed to be at the station well before airtime to prepare. Her producer, Amy Coons, called Jody's apartment at approximately 4 in the morning when she hadn't arrived on schedule. Jody answered. She was awake. She told Amy she had overslept and that she would be leaving immediately and would be there shortly. That phone call, its ordinariness, its complete lack of any sign of distress, Jody's voice on the line, sounding like a woman who was mildly flustered about sleeping through her alarm, and nothing more, is the last confirmed contact anyone had with Jody Huisentruit. After she hung up, she gathered her things, picked up her red high heels, took her hairdryer, and headed downstairs to the parking lot. She did not arrive at KIMT. She did not call back. The morning news went on without its anchor, and as the minutes stretched past any reasonable commute window, the people at the station began to understand that something had gone wrong. A welfare check brought officers to the Key Apartments parking lot, and what they found there was the physical record of what had happened, not a complete record, not a narrative with a beginning and end that could be followed to a resolution, but a collection of objects and marks that together painted something terrible. Jody's red Mazda Miata was sitting in the lot. Her belongings were scattered on the ground near the car, her red high heels, her hairdryer, items that a woman in a hurry would have been carrying to her vehicle. Her car key was on the ground, bent, not simply dropped, but physically bent, the kind of deformation that happens under force, during a struggle, when something is gripped or pulled or twisted hard. A palm print was identified on the exterior of the car. A witness in the area reported hearing a scream at some point during that early morning window, a single scream in the pre-dawn quiet, and then silence. No one called it in at the time. No one investigated it in the moment. It registered as something heard and then mentally filed away under the category of ambiguous nighttime sounds in a residential area, the kind of noise the sleeping mind incorporates and the waking mind dismisses. By the time it became a data point in a missing persons case, the parking lot had already given up most of what it was going to give. Here's the critical detail that makes this scene so haunting. There are no security cameras covering that parking lot. In 1995, residential apartment parking lots in mid-sized Iowa cities were not routinely surveilled. The Key Apartments lot was a dark, quiet, essentially unmonitored space in the hours before dawn, less than a mile from the television station, surrounded by residential streets that would have been deserted at 4:30 in the morning, with virtually no pedestrian or vehicle traffic to produce witnesses. Jody walked out of her building, crossed that lot, and was gone. The bent key, the scattered shoes, the palm print, the single heard scream, these are the entire physical record. There is no footage. There is no clear eyewitness account of the abduction itself. There is a phone call at 4 in the morning and a scattered parking lot at 4:30. And between those 2 points is a gap that has consumed 3 decades of investigative effort without yielding an arrest. If you're finding these cases as difficult to process as they deserve to be, hit subscribe. This channel goes deeper on cases like this every week. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in Iowa law enforcement history. More than 1,000 people were interviewed. Thousands of tips came in from across the state and beyond. Jody was a public figure. Her face was on television every morning, and her disappearance generated exactly the kind of widespread attention that generates tips both useful and useless in roughly equal measure. The FBI became involved. Investigators worked the case for months, then years, then decades. The physical evidence from the parking lot was processed and reprocessed as forensic technology improved. Databases were searched and cross-referenced. The investigation never closed. Now this is where the case turns in a specific direction that requires careful framing. Over the years, investigators identified individuals described as persons of interest, people whose proximity to Jody, whose behavior in the period around her disappearance, or whose connections to her raised questions that investigators wanted answered. The name most consistently associated with this designation in media coverage is John Van Cease, a man who knew Jody personally and who investigators examined closely. Mason City Police have confirmed that Van Cease took a polygraph examination as part of the investigation, but have declined to clearly state whether he passed it or what conclusions they drew from the results. He has never been charged. He has never been arrested in connection with Jody's disappearance. He has denied involvement. He is described here, precisely and only, as he has been officially designated, a person of interest who was never charged. That is the complete, verified extent of what can be stated about him in connection with this case. There are other names that have circulated in media coverage and online discussion over the years, other individuals who have been described as persons of interest at various points. None of them have been charged. None of them have been convicted. The case is officially unsolved. What investigators have said publicly, across 30 years of statements, is that they believe Jodi was targeted. The swiftness and completeness of the abduction, the bent key suggesting she was seized before she could even get the door open, the belongings scattered by the force of it, the single scream and then silence, is not consistent with a random opportunistic encounter. Someone was in that parking lot before Jodi came downstairs. Someone knew her schedule, her car, her routine. Someone was waiting in the dark of a residential parking lot at 4:30 in the morning for a woman who had been on the phone with her producer 4 minutes earlier. That is the working theory, stated by investigators across multiple interviews over 3 decades. It has never been turned into a charge. It has never been turned into a conviction. Jodi Huisentruit has been missing since June 27, 1995, and no one has ever been held accountable for it. The bent car key is still in evidence somewhere in Mason City. A message played out on an answering machine at KIMT that morning that Jodi never heard a follow-up call from the station, her name spoken into empty air. The tape running in a building less than a mile from where she was taken. The Miata sat in the lot. The heels were on the pavement. The hairdryer was on the ground. A woman who had been alive and embarrassed about oversleeping 4 minutes earlier was simply gone, and the parking lot held only what the struggle had left behind. Jodi Huisentruit has never been found. The next disappearance took not one person but 2, and it happened in the middle of a summer afternoon on a recreational trail beside a lake, in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes every single day. The town of Evansdale sits in Black Hawk County in northeastern Iowa, about 110 miles northeast of Des Moines, a small city of roughly 5,000 people, tucked close to Waterloo. It is the kind of community built around the rhythms of Midwestern family life neighborhoods where children move between houses freely, where a grandmother's home is a natural base of operations for cousins spending a summer afternoon together, where a bike ride to a nearby lake is the sort of ordinary afternoon activity that requires no special arrangement or oversight because it has been done safely 1,000 times before. Myers Lake sits at the edge of town, surrounded by a recreational trail that loops the water and connects to a wider park system, a well-used, publicly visible trail, the kind that draws joggers and dog walkers and families on weekend afternoons, the kind that, on a warm July Friday in 2012, would have had regular traffic moving through it in both directions. On the afternoon of July 13, 2012, 10-year-old Lyric Cook and her 8-year-old cousin, Elizabeth Collins, left their grandmother's house together and rode their bikes toward Myers Lake. It was a Friday, just past noon, the height of Iowa summer. Lyric was the older of the two, small and sharp-featured, the kind of kid who took care of things and people around her. Elizabeth was younger and quieter, with the particular trust in older cousins that comes from spending summers together in the same town. They were together, which felt like its own form of safety, 2 children in daylight, on a public trail beside a lake in a town where their grandmother lived, where they were known, where they belonged. Nobody watching them leave thought twice about it. They did not come home. When Lyric and Elizabeth didn't return by late afternoon, the calls started. Their families began checking the route between the grandmother's house and the lake, retracing the path those 2 girls would have taken on their bikes. The familiar summer geography of a town small enough that the lake trail was less than a mile from where they'd started. What investigators found when they reached the southeast corner of Myers Lake stopped the search in its tracks and reframed everything that came after. The bikes were there, both of them, lying on their sides at the edge of the trail near the water. And beside the bikes, on the ground, was a small pink purse. The girls were not there. Let's hold on that image for a moment, because it does something specific to the shape of this case. 2 bikes on a trail beside a lake, a pink purse on the ground, no girls. In the landscape of missing children cases, abandoned belongings tell a particular kind of story. They mark the location where a situation changed, where the ordinary afternoon ended and something else began. The bikes and the purse established, with near certainty, that whatever had happened to Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins had happened at or near that spot on the Myers Lake Trail. Sometime after noon on July 13, 2012, they had ridden to that location under their own power, which meant they had arrived willingly and normally as two cousins on bikes on a summer afternoon. And then they had left without their bikes, which meant they had not left under their own power in any ordinary sense. The investigation mobilized with extraordinary speed, and the scale of it reflected both the horror of the situation and the hard-learned institutional knowledge that had accumulated in Iowa since the Gosh and Martin cases. The FBI was called in. Hundreds of volunteers descended on Evansdale and the surrounding area. Law enforcement set up a command center and began a systematic search of the lake, the trail system, the surrounding neighborhoods, and the wider park complex. Search dogs were brought in, and here is one of the details that shaped the early investigation most significantly. The dogs detected the girl's scent in the area around the trail and the lake edge, but the scent trail ended at the water. The lake itself became the immediate focus. Authorities made the decision to drain Myers Lake, a task that investigators estimated could take up to 3 days given the lake's size. It was an enormous logistical undertaking, and it proceeded under the assumption that the water might hold the answer to where Lyric and Elizabeth had gone. The lake was drained. The lake was empty. The girls were not in it. Here's what doesn't make sense about the early weeks of this search, and what drove a particular kind of dread through the coverage at the time. Law enforcement and the FBI, speaking publicly during the active search phase, said explicitly that they believed the girls were still alive, not as a reflexive reassurance to keep the public engaged, but as a genuine operational conclusion based on the available evidence. There were no confirmed signs of violence at the scene. The scent dog's work at the water's edge was ambiguous in its implications. The absence of the girls from the drained lake supported the possibility that they had been taken by vehicle from that location, which, if true, meant there was a chance they were somewhere, with someone, alive and recoverable. Investigators said they strongly believed the girls had not been killed. The FBI said it publicly. Search teams operated under that framework. These children are missing, not gone, and the goal is to find them and bring them home. That belief was maintained for months. A surveillance photograph became one of the most discussed pieces of evidence during the active search phase. A man and a white van had been captured on camera at an Evansdale convenience store at approximately 2 p.m. on July 13th, within the window of the girl's disappearance, near enough to the lake trail to be geographically relevant. The image circulated widely, as these things do when the case is high profile, and investigators are working every possible lead simultaneously. That man was identified and investigated. He was cleared. The white van led nowhere. A sex offender canvass of the area was conducted, interviewing registered offenders within a defined radius of Myers Lake. Each one was assessed and cleared or ruled out. Hundreds of tips came in from across Iowa and from outside the state. Each one was logged, followed, and in the vast majority of cases, eliminated. The investigation cast an enormous net and came back with nothing that could be turned into a name or a charge. This is where it stops being normal in a very specific and quietly devastating way. The investigation was thorough. The resources deployed were substantial. The FBI's involvement brought expertise and infrastructure that went well beyond what a local department could manage alone. And yet, as the summer of 2012 ended and autumn began in Black Hawk County, Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins remained missing, and the trail, already cold in the literal sense as Iowa moved toward its gray November, had not produced anything that investigators could act on. December 5th, 2012. Nearly 5 months after two girls rode their bikes to a lake on a summer afternoon, a pair of hunters moving through the Seven Bridges Wildlife Area in rural Bremer County, roughly 20 miles northeast of Evansdale, dense woodland, the kind of terrain that swallows things that aren't meant to be found, discovered human remains. The identification process moved quickly, given the circumstances and the active missing persons cases. The remains were those of Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins. They had been there for some time. The exact circumstances of their deaths, what happened, how it happened, who was responsible, were not publicly established in a way that produced charges or arrests. The manner of their deaths was determined and recorded, but the person or persons responsible for what happened on that trail beside Myers Lake on July 13, 2012, has never been identified. No arrests have been made. No charges have been filed. The case officially remains unsolved. The contradictions in this case are the things that make it impossible to fully absorb. Two children in daylight on a public recreational trail in a small town, on a route their family knew, within a mile of their grandmother's house, a trail that had regular traffic on a summer Friday. Two bikes and a pink purse that marked the exact location where their afternoon ended. A lake that investigators drained completely and found empty. A 5-month search involving the FBI, hundreds of volunteers, thousands of tips, surveillance footage, scent dogs, sex offender canvases, and the full weight of local and federal law enforcement, and still, no name. Still, no charge. Still, 30 bikes could pass that corner of the Myers Lake Trail on any given summer afternoon, and nobody knows who was there on July 13th, 2012, and nobody knows what they did, and nobody is in a prison cell for it. Elizabeth Collins was 8 years old. Lyric Cook was 10. Their bikes are the image that stays. Two ordinary children's bicycles on their sides at the edge of a recreational trail beside a drained lake in an Iowa summer. A pink purse on the ground beside them. The trail, empty in both directions. The water gone. That is the complete picture that the physical evidence preserved of the moment their afternoon ended. Everything that came after the months of searching, the discovery in Bremer County, the case file that remains open that is the frame around that image, and the image itself has never been explained. The paperboy nightmare wasn't over. 2 years after Johnny Gosch vanished from a West Des Moines suburb before sunrise, the same nightmare played out again in the same city. Another boy, another route, another pre-dawn residential street. Another morning when the papers weren't delivered, and someone had to go looking, and found only the absence of a child where a child should have been. His name was Eugene Martin, and he was 13 years old. And the law that had been passed specifically because of what happened to Johnny Gosch had been on the books for exactly 43 days when Eugene left his house at 5 in the morning and didn't come back. August 12th, 1984. Des Moines, the south side of the city. Eugene Martin was a Des Moines Register paperboy, 13 years old, doing what paperboys do in the hour before the city wakes up, moving through residential streets in the pre-dawn dark. The route familiar enough to navigate without thinking, the neighborhood quiet enough that the sound of a wagon wheel on pavement would carry half a block in the still air. It was a Tuesday morning in August, the summer heat already building even at 5 a.m. The kind of heavy Midwestern warmth that settles in overnight and doesn't lift until well after sunrise. Eugene left his house around 5 o'clock, headed out to begin his deliveries, and somewhere on the south side of Des Moines on that August morning, in a neighborhood of houses and streetlights and morning routines, he was gone. The specifics of his last confirmed sighting are limited in the public record. This is a case where the documented details are sparse compared to Gosch, and those sparse points should be acknowledged plainly rather than filled in. What is known, he was on his route. He was last confirmed in the early morning hours on those south side streets. He did not complete his deliveries. He did not come home. The precise location and circumstances of his disappearance, the equivalent of the Gosch case's paper drop corner, the blue car, the stocky man, are not established in the public record with the same granularity. Here's the critical detail that gives this disappearance its particular weight in Iowa's history. The Johnny Gosch Bill had been signed into law on July 1st, 1984. It existed specifically to prevent the institutional failure that had cost the Gosch investigation its first 72 hours. The runaway assumption, the waiting period, the lost ground. It was 43 days old when Eugene Martin left his house before sunrise. 43 days. The ink was barely dry on the legislation that bore another missing boy's name. And here was a second paper boy. Same city, same era, same pre-dawn residential setting, gone in the same fundamental way. The response this time was faster, driven by the new law and by the raw institutional memory of what the delay had cost in 1982. But faster did not mean successful. Eugene Martin's face joined the milk carton campaign that Johnny Gosch's case had helped create. Those school photographs printed on the sides of dairy cartons and distributed to breakfast tables across the country. the faces of missing children staring out from between the orange juice and the cereal, asking the question that nobody wanted to have to answer. Have you seen this child? Two faces from the same city, two boys who had done the same job on the same kind of morning, in the same kind of neighborhood, looking out from the same cardboard panels at families eating breakfast in Iowa and Ohio and everywhere else. It was an image of a specific, terrible pattern that nobody could fully explain or stop. Both cases remain technically open to this day. Law enforcement has stated publicly that both boys are presumed dead, even though neither has been legally declared dead and neither has been found. Investigators have been asked, repeatedly, across 4 decades of interviews and case reviews, whether the Gosh and Martin disappearances are connected, whether the same person or persons were responsible for both. The answer has consistently been some version of the same carefully worded response. We may never know. The cases share geography, demographics, timing, and setting in ways that feel significant from the outside. They have not been officially linked. John Walsh, the victim's rights advocate and longtime host of America's Most Wanted, stated publicly what many people who followed both cases had long believed. I always believed there was a serial pedophile kidnapper in that area. That is his stated belief, clearly labeled as such. It has not been confirmed by any law enforcement agency. The official position remains that the connection between the two cases is unproven. 2 boys on 2 mornings in the same city, 2 wagons, 2 routes that ended somewhere in the pre-dawn dark of Des Moines, 2 faces on a milk carton, looking out at a country that was only just beginning to build the systems and laws and awareness that might, in some future case, make a difference. A college student on an interstate would vanish next, and this time, the failure wasn't just institutional. It was the failure of everyone who drove past a disabled car on a busy highway and assumed that someone else would stop. There is a specific kind of vulnerability that exists on the shoulder of an American interstate highway, and it is one that most drivers have felt at least once: the sudden lurch of a car losing power, the controlled drift toward the shoulder, the hazard lights clicking on in the bright afternoon air, and then the waiting. Cars streaming past at 70 miles per hour, 3 feet from where you're standing, each one a blur of glass and metal and someone else's destination. You are visible to thousands of people in the space of an hour. You are also, in a specific and terrible way, completely alone. Nobody stops for a stranger on a highway shoulder anymore, if they ever reliably did. You are a problem that belongs to you, in a strip of gravel between the white line and the grass, and the rest of the world is moving past you at highway speed without slowing down. Tammy Jo Zywicki knew that vulnerability on the afternoon of August 23, 1992. She was 21 years old, a senior at Grinnell College in Iowa, heading back to school for the start of her final year. She had driven from her family's home in the Chicago suburbs, stopping first to drop her brother off at Northwestern University in Evanston, and then had turned west on Interstate 80, pointing herself toward Iowa and the campus she had spent 3 years building a life on. She played sports. She was passionate about photography. She had a Canon 35mm camera with her in the car, along with a Loris brand wristwatch and the ordinary accumulation of belongings that a college student carries back to school at the end of summer. She was 21 years old and strong and capable, and had the whole senior year ahead of her: classes, friends, the particular bittersweet awareness of a last year at a place you love. She was 2 hours into a drive she had probably made before. Everything about it was routine. Her white 1985 Pontiac Tone 1000 broke down on Interstate 80 near mile marker 83 in LaSalle County, Illinois, still well east of the Iowa state line, roughly halfway through the drive to Grinnell. A fact-check note here, because geography matters in this case. Tammy Zywicki is Iowa's case, in the sense that she was an Iowa college student heading to an Iowa campus. But the breakdown itself happened in Illinois, and the investigation's primary jurisdiction was the Illinois State Police, with FBI involvement. She is on this list because she belongs to Iowa, to Grinnell, to the college community she was returning to the life she was building in that state, and because what happened to her on that Illinois highway shoulder is inseparable from the Iowa story she was in the middle of living. But the precise geography should be stated plainly rather than collapsed. She pulled onto the shoulder sometime in the early to mid-afternoon. The highway was busy. Interstate 80 in northern Illinois on a Sunday in August carries substantial traffic, a constant flow of vehicles moving in both directions. The kind of road where you are never more than a few seconds from another car. She was there, on that shoulder, visible to everyone, alone. Sometime between 3:10 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a witness observed a tractor trailer parked near Tammy's disabled Pontiac. The driver of that truck was described as a white male, somewhere between 35 and 40 years old, over 6 feet tall, with dark, bushy hair. That is the description as it exists in the public record. That is the extent of the confirmed witness account of another person's presence at that scene during that window. The truck was there. The driver was there. And at some point in that early afternoon window on the shoulder of Interstate 80, Tammy Zywicki was taken. Here's the critical detail, and it is one of the most damaging institutional failures in this entire list of cases. An Illinois state trooper drove past Tammy's Pontiac the following day, noted it as an abandoned vehicle on the shoulder, issued it a ticket, and had it towed. The car was not processed as a potential crime scene at that point. Tammy's mother had already called the Illinois State Police the night of August 23rd. The same night, Tammy failed to arrive at Grinnell to report that her daughter was missing and had last been known to be driving Interstate 80. That report existed in the system when the trooper encountered the car on August 24th. The connection between the reported missing person and the abandoned vehicle on the highway was not made with urgency. The car was towed before it could tell investigators everything it might have told them. The disappearance was not treated as a serious, active investigation for several days after Tammy's mother first called it in. This is where it stops being normal and where the weight of those lost days becomes impossible to quantify. Every hour after an abduction that passes without active investigation is ground that cannot be recovered. Every day that a vehicle sits in a tow yard rather than a forensic bay is evidence that degrades or disappears. The window in which a truck driver's route can be retraced, his stops logged, his contacts identified, that window closes. The institutional assumption that a car on a highway shoulder is an abandoned vehicle problem rather than a missing person's emergency cost this investigation days it never got back. 9 days after Tammy Zywicki left her family's home to drive back to college, her body was found along Interstate 44 in rural Lawrence County, Missouri. In the stretch between Springfield and Joplin, nearly 500 miles from where her car had been found on the Interstate 80 shoulder in Illinois. She had been stabbed to death. Her body had been wrapped in a sheet and a blanket and bound in duct tape. The Canon camera she had been carrying, the one she used to document the world she was so passionate about capturing, was never recovered. Her Loris wristwatch was never recovered. The specific objects that had been with her on that drive, the ordinary belongings of a college student heading back to school, have never been found. Now this is where the investigation turns into something that consumed years and multiple agencies without ever producing a resolution. A 14-investigator multi-state task force was assembled to work the case, drawing on the Illinois State Police, the FBI, and other agencies across the 3 states the case touched. The focus, given the tractor-trailer witness account and the geography of where the body was found, shifted heavily toward the trucking community. Interstate 80 and Interstate 44 are both major trucking corridors, and someone who moved between those 2 highways regularly as part of their job would have had both the means and the geography to commit what the evidence suggested had occurred. Investigators identified and interviewed numerous truck drivers. They followed leads into the trucking community for years. No charges were ever filed. Here's what doesn't make sense about this case, in a way that continues to produce a specific, grinding frustration decades later. She was on one of the busiest highways in the American Midwest on a Sunday afternoon. Thousands of vehicles passed that stretch of Interstate 80 between the time her car broke down and the time the trooper found it the next day. Someone stopped. Someone was there. A witness saw a truck. That truck had a driver, and yet the gap between witness saw a truck near her car between 3:10 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon and body found 500 miles away 9 days later has never been closed. The physical trail, the highway shoulder, the tow yard, the Missouri roadside is documented. The human being who connected those locations has never been identified in a way that produced a charge. Tammy Zywicki's case remains officially unsolved. No arrests, no charges, no conviction. The camera and the watch are still missing, somewhere out in the three-state geography of this case, and the person who took them from her has never been held accountable for it. A disabled car on a bright interstate shoulder. Thousands of cars streaming past without stopping. One truck that did stop, and a driver who was there and gone, and a young woman who was there and gone with him, and a tow truck that came the next day and took the Pontiac away, and a campus in Iowa that set a place for her that fall and kept waiting for her to arrive. If cases like Tammy's are the reason you're here, hit subscribe. There are more files like this one waiting for you every week. Back in Des Moines, the following year would bring a case that stripped away even the minimal context that gave the Paperboy cases their setting. No route, no pre-dawn dark, no wagon. Just a boy who told his mother he was walking to a friend's house down the street, a distance so short it barely qualified as a walk at all, and never arrived. His name was Mark Allen. He was 13 years old. The date was March 29th, 1986, the day before Easter, and the sidewalk between his house and his neighbor's house was the last geography he was ever confirmed to have occupied. Des Moines, a residential street, a short walk on a spring afternoon, and then nothing, not a trace, not a witness, not a physical detail that has ever led anywhere. The Paperboy cases had at least left wagons and drop corners and blue cars and witnesses at the scene. Mark Allen left only a front door closing behind him and a neighbor's house he never reached. Let's establish what is known and be precise about what isn't, because this case has fewer confirmed details in the public record than almost any other on this list. Mark James Warren Allen was 13 years old, living with his family on the south side of Des Moines, the same general area, geographically, as the Gosh and Martin cases, a cluster of residential neighborhoods in a single metropolitan zone that produced 3 missing boys in 4 years without producing a single arrest. He told his mother on the afternoon of March 29th that he was going to walk to a friend's house down the street. The distance was short, the kind of walk you make 100 times without a second thought. The kind of errand that doesn't require a jacket or a plan or a goodbye that means anything beyond, see you in a few minutes. His mother said fine. He left. He never arrived at the friend's house. He never came home. The precise route between his home and his friend's house, the specific path he would have taken on that Easter Eve afternoon, the exact streets and sidewalks is not detailed in the public record in a way that would allow it to be reconstructed with confidence. What is known is the beginning and the end point that was never reached. He left his house. He was heading to a neighbor's home a short distance away, and somewhere in that small geography on a spring afternoon in 1986, he was gone. No confirmed witness account of an interaction, no physical evidence left at a specific location, no abandoned belongings that marked a spot on the map and said, "Here, this is where it happened. Here is the wagon. Here is the key. Here is the thing that was left behind." Mark Allen left nothing behind except his absence. Here's what makes the Des Moines cluster so particularly difficult to process as a pattern. Mark Allen was not a paperboy. Gosh and Martin had at least shared a specific role, a specific pre-dawn vulnerability, a specific setting, a specific type of boy doing a specific type of job in a specific kind of darkness. That pattern, as awful as it was, had a shape that investigators could try to work with. Mark Allen broke that shape entirely. He wasn't on a route. It wasn't before sunrise. He wasn't alone in a pre-dawn residential landscape in the way that paperboys are alone. He was walking down the street on a spring afternoon the day before Easter, headed somewhere he had certainly been before, in a neighborhood where he was known, and he vanished just as completely, just as finally, and just as without explanation as the 2 boys who had gone before him. Investigators have acknowledged the geographic proximity of all 3 cases, Gosh, Martin, and Allen, without officially connecting them. The cases occurred in the same general area of Des Moines across a 4-year window. 3 boys, 13 or younger, gone without explanation, without recovered remains, without charges, without answers. Whether one person was responsible for all 3, or 2, or none of the same people, that is officially unknown. It remains labeled as theory and possibility, not established fact. Law enforcement has not linked the cases. What they have said, consistently, is that all three remain open and that none of them have been solved. Mark Allen would be in his early 50s today. His case file sits in a Des Moines records room, alongside the files of two other boys from the same neighborhoods, the same years, the same silence. Easter decorations on the porches of the houses on his street. A sidewalk between two front doors, a distance a child should have been able to cover in 2 minutes. An absence that has lasted nearly 40 years. The next victim made it to a public parking lot full of holiday shoppers and still didn't make it home. December 19th, 1979. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, the Westdale Mall parking lot, a Wednesday evening in the week before Christmas. The kind of night when a suburban shopping center is as close to fully alive as it ever gets. Cars circling for spaces. Families moving through the cold air in coats and scarves. The windows of storefronts throwing warm yellow light across the asphalt. Christmas music leaking through every door that opens and closes. It is one of the most populated settings on this entire list. Dozens of people in the immediate vicinity. Hundreds within a short walk. A parking lot lit by overhead lamps against the December dark. Visible from multiple directions. Accessible from every angle. The kind of public space that feels inherently safe because of the sheer density of other human beings moving through it. And in that parking lot, in the family's tan 1972 Buick Electra, 18-year-old Michelle Martinko was murdered, and it would take 39 years, a discarded drinking straw, and a forensic technique that didn't exist in 1979 to put a name to the person who killed her. Let's build the evening from the beginning, because the specific details of how Michelle came to be alone in that parking lot matter to understanding everything that followed. Michelle Martinko was a Cedar Rapids teenager, 18 years old, with the kind of full and forward-looking life that makes violent endings feel most unbearably wrong. She was a singer. She was involved in theater. She had recently performed in a school choir banquet that same evening, December 19th, a Wednesday, and after the event, she had done something entirely ordinary. She had driven alone to the Westdale Mall to look for a winter coat. She had $186 on her, enough to make the purchase she had in mind, and she was driving her parents' car, the tan Buick Electra. She went into the mall. She was seen inside the mall that evening, moving through the holiday crowds, doing what millions of people do in the week before Christmas, in a Midwestern shopping center browsing, considering, existing in the ordinary commerce of a December night. She did not come home. When 10 o'clock came and went without Michelle returning, her parents grew concerned and reported her missing. Officers responding to the report located the family's Buick in the Westdale Mall parking lot. Michelle was inside the vehicle. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her $186 was still on her. Her autopsy showed no signs of sexual assault. The killing was not a robbery. Nothing of financial value had been taken from either Michelle or the car. When investigators from the Cedar Rapids Police Department began working through what the evidence told them about the nature of the crime, they arrived at a conclusion that was in some ways more disturbing than a random robbery gone wrong. They determined that the homicide appeared to be personal in nature. Something about the ferocity and the focus of the attack, a young woman stabbed multiple times in a parked car in a mall parking lot, her money untouched. Her attacker, apparently indifferent to her valuables, suggested to investigators at the time that this was not a stranger crime, driven by opportunity or financial motive, but something more targeted, more specific, more deliberate. Here's what doesn't make sense about that early conclusion, and what would haunt this case for the next 4 decades. If it was personal in nature, where was the person? Cedar Rapids in 1979 was not a city where someone could have a violent personal grudge against an 18-year-old girl and be completely invisible to her family, her friends, her school community. Michelle Martinko had a life, a social circle, a set of relationships. Investigators worked outward from her, interviewing people who knew her, people who might have had a grievance, people who connected to her through school and theater and choir, and the ordinary social fabric of a teenager's life in a mid-sized Iowa city. They received more than 200 tips. They worked the case hard through 1980 and into the years after, following every thread that presented itself. Nothing held. No arrest, no charge. The personal in nature theory could not be turned into a name. And as the years passed, investigators began to quietly re-examine whether that initial framing had been correct at all, whether a killer who left no identifiable motive and no recoverable trail through the victim's personal life might not have been personally connected to her at all, but had simply attacked her in a way that looked personal because of its ferocity. The question of whether Michelle knew her killer is one that would not be definitively answered for nearly 4 decades. The physical evidence from the scene had one thing working in its favor. Even in 1979, blood. The attacker had left blood in the vehicle. The struggle had been violent enough, and the injuries sustained in it had been significant enough. That biological material from a second person was present at the scene and was collected and preserved. Investigators at the time knew it was there. They knew it was not Michelle's. They could not do anything useful with it in 1979 because DNA profiling as a forensic tool did not yet exist. The blood sat in evidence storage through the 1980s, through the 1990s, through the early 2000s, waiting for science to catch up to what it contained. In 2006, investigators extracted a DNA profile from that preserved evidence. It was a significant moment after 27 years. They finally had a genetic fingerprint of the person who had been in that car with Michelle Martinko. But a DNA profile is only as useful as the database you can compare it against. And when the profile was run against the available databases in 2006, it matched nothing. No hit. The profile was real, precise, and completely unidentifiable. It belonged to a person who was not in the system, and without a name to attach it to, it could not produce an arrest. The case continued. In 2017, the Cedar Rapids Police Department contracted with Parabon Nanolabs, a forensic genetics company that had developed the ability to generate a physical description, a composite image, from DNA alone, a technique called snapshot phenotyping. Parabon analyzed the evidence DNA and produced a composite image of what the suspect likely looked like: projected facial features, probable hair color, probable eye color, a visual approximation of a person, assembled entirely from their own genetic code. It was distributed publicly, an image of a face derived from blood left in a tan Buick in 1979, staring out from news coverage in 2017 as though the case had just happened. It generated tips. It generated attention. It did not immediately generate the name. Now this is where the case turns, and where it turns, in a direction that feels almost cinematic. In retrospect, the kind of resolution that seems too precise to be real, until you understand that the science that made it possible had been specifically developed to find exactly this kind of killer. In October 2018, a man named Jerry Burns visited a Pizza Ranch restaurant. He used a straw. He left it on the table. Investigators who had by this point been developing a lead on Burns through the emerging technique of investigative genetic genealogy, which uses genealogical databases to build family trees around an unknown DNA profile and work toward a suspect, were watching. They collected the straw. They extracted DNA from it. They compared it to the profile that had been sitting in evidence storage since 2006. The profile recovered from the blood in Michelle Martinko's family's car in the Westdale Mall parking lot in December 1979. It was an exact match. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle Martinko was killed in that parking lot, Cedar Rapids police arrested Jerry Lynn Burns. He was in his 60s. He was a successful business owner. He was married, with children. He was, by the accounts of people who knew him, a respected member of his small Iowa community. There was no history, no prior record, no visible thread connecting him to the 18-year-old girl he had killed in a mall parking lot in 1979. He was a stranger. The personal in nature framing from the original investigation had been wrong, or at least unprovable in the direction it pointed. The ferocity of the attack had not been about Michelle specifically, or if it had, that specificity existed only in the mind of a man who had carried the secret for 39 years, without ever being connected to it by anything except a bloodstain in a car and a discarded straw in a restaurant nearly 4 decades later. Jerry Lynn Burns was convicted of first-degree murder in 2020. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michelle Martinko's family was present for the verdict. 39 years and 11 months after she drove to a mall to buy a winter coat and never came home, someone was held accountable for killing her. The case is resolved in the precise legal sense. There is a conviction. There is a sentence. There is a name attached to the violence that happened in that parking lot on a December Wednesday in 1979. What the resolution cannot restore is the 40 years of her family living with the open wound of an unsolved murder. The 40 years of a case file sitting in Cedar Rapids with a DNA profile that couldn't find its match. The 40 years of a killer living a normal life in a small Iowa town, while the girl he killed in a holiday parking lot stayed 18 years old forever. The frost on a car windshield in an empty lot at 4 in the morning. The Christmas lights still burning in the mall windows hours after the shoppers have gone home. The evidence bag in a storage room that held a secret for nearly 4 decades and finally gave it up to a piece of plastic from a restaurant table. That is the image this case leaves. Justice arrived. It arrived on the exact anniversary of the crime, as though the calendar itself had been waiting. The next search leaned on everything Iowa had learned from every case before it, from the Gosh Law, from the Tibbetts phone data, from the FBI involvement in Evansdale, from every institutional failure and hard-won improvement that 4 decades of missing persons cases had produced. The county was Poweshiek, the same county where Molly Tibbetts had been found in a cornfield 3 years earlier. The missing person was 10 years old. And the technology that found Molly, the aerial searches, the drone footage, the heat sensors, was deployed again over a different landscape with a different outcome. His name was Xavier Harrelson, and he had just turned 11 years old when the search for him began. And the search for him was enormous, and it found him too late. Montezuma, Iowa, May 27th, 2021. Poweshiek County, the same county where Molly Tibbetts had gone jogging on a summer evening 3 years earlier and had been found in a cornfield 21 miles from where she disappeared. The county seat is Montezuma, a small town of about 1,500 people sitting in the rolling farmland of central Iowa, quiet in the way that small Iowa county seats are quiet. A courthouse square, a main street, grain elevators on the horizon, the kind of place where the pace of life is slow enough that a child's absence registers immediately in the fabric of the community. Spruce Village Trailer Park sits at the edge of town, a modest residential community of mobile homes and small yards, and the particular close-quarters neighborliness that develops when people live within a few feet of each other. It was from here, on a Thursday morning in late May, that a 10-year-old boy named Xavier Harrelson left home on his bike and did not come back. Let's establish who Xavier was before we establish what happened, because the specific details of his life give the circumstances of his disappearance a particular weight. Xavier Harrelson was 10 years old in late May of 2021. He would turn 11 in a matter of days, his birthday arriving during the search rather than at a party. He was the kind of child that the people who knew him describe in terms that say something specific about how he had been shaped by his circumstances. Kind, caring, responsible beyond his years. His mother, Sarah, had health challenges that meant Xavier had taken on a role in the household that no 10-year-old should have to carry. Friends described him as a caretaker for her, a child who looked after his parent rather than the other way around, who had developed a seriousness and a gentleness that came from having real responsibilities in a home that needed him. He was, by every account, a child who was anchored to his life and to the people in it. There was no obvious reason, no fight, no distress, no conflict that anyone could identify why he would have left and not come back. On the morning of May 27th, Xavier was last seen at approximately 11 o'clock, leaving his home in Spruce Village on his bike, heading in a direction that was not precisely established. That detail, the unknown direction, is one of the things that shaped the search in its earliest hours. A child on a bike in a small town has a limited geography, but limited in rural Iowa means something different than it does in a city. Montezuma sits adjacent to Diamond Lake Park, a 660-acre recreational area with woodland, water, trails, and enough terrain to absorb a search effort for days. The park was the immediate focus of attention, once Xavier failed to return, and a family friend reported him missing that afternoon. A local search mobilized quickly, drawing on the community and on the institutional infrastructure that Poweshiek County had built, in part because of Molly Tibbetts, in part because of the hard-learned lessons of every Iowa missing persons case before her. By the time the search reached its full scale, it involved approximately 500 volunteers moving through the terrain around Montezuma in organized grids, supported by aerial assets that included fixed-wing aircraft and drones equipped with heat sensors capable of detecting a human body's thermal signature through brush and tree cover. The dive team worked the lake. The search radius extended outward from Spruce Village in a half-mile, then a mile, then a wider perimeter as the days passed without a result. Every trail in Diamond Lake Park was walked. Every drainage ditch and tree line in the surrounding area was checked. Here's the critical detail that investigators and search coordinators kept returning to publicly during those early days. The terrain worked in their favor, in a way it hadn't in the Tibbetts case. It was late May, not late July. The corn in Poweshiek County had not yet reached the height that had made the blacktop road outside Brooklyn so effectively concealing in 2018. The fields were low, the sight lines were long, and the aerial assets, the drones with their heat sensors, the planes making passes over the countryside, had a visibility advantage that the Tibbetts search had not enjoyed in the same degree. The search coordinator said publicly that this search was very similar to the search for Molly Tibbetts, which also occurred in Poweshiek County about 3 years earlier. The comparison was meant to convey the scale and seriousness of the effort. It carried, in retrospect, a different kind of weight. Days passed. The 500 volunteers walked the grids. The drones made their passes. The dive team cleared the lake. The search expanded. And Xavier Harrelson was not found. This is where it stops being normal in the particular way that extended searches stop being normal, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of days without an answer. Each morning beginning with the hope that today would be the day, and ending with the same silence. Weeks passed. The active search phase scaled back, as it inevitably does when resources and personnel cannot be sustained indefinitely against an absence of concrete leads. The investigation continued, but the 500 volunteers went home, and Montezuma settled back into the quiet of a small Iowa county seat, carrying a new weight in its community fabric. Another missing person, another open file, another family living in the suspension of not knowing. What was known publicly during this period: Xavier had last been seen on his bike. His direction when he left home was unknown. No confirmed witness account placed him at a specific location after 11. On May 27th, the search had covered an enormous area with significant technological support and had not produced him alive or located him. The circumstances of his disappearance were not explained. The investigation remained active. The resolution came months later, and it came in the form that everyone involved had feared from the beginning, but had spent the intervening weeks hoping to avoid. Human remains were found northwest of Montezuma. The discovery was made in a location within the broader search area, and the initial public statement from law enforcement was measured and cautious in the way that such statements are required to be before identification can be formally confirmed. The remains appeared to be those of a juvenile, and the clothing found with them matched the description of what Xavier Harrelson had been wearing when he was last seen: a red t-shirt, blue pajama pants, black high-top shoes. The clothing of a 10-year-old boy who had left home on a Thursday morning in late May to ride his bike and had not come back. The identification was confirmed. The remains were Xavier's. Here's what doesn't make sense about this outcome, in a way that sits alongside every other case on this list and refuses to resolve neatly. The search had been comprehensive. The technology deployed had been specifically designed to find exactly what it was looking for. 500 people had walked that terrain. Drones with heat sensors had flown it. And the answer had been in the landscape the whole time, northwest of Montezuma, waiting to be found in a location that the search had either not reached or not penetrated deeply enough in its initial passes. The precise circumstances of Xavier's death, what happened between 11 a.m. on May 27th, when he was last seen leaving his home on his bike, and the discovery of his remains months later, have not been publicly detailed in a way that provides a complete account. The manner of what happened remains, in the public record, incompletely explained. No charges have been filed. No arrest has been publicly announced in connection with his death. The investigation, as far as the available public record indicates, did not produce the kind of resolution that the Martinko case eventually produced, or even the partial resolution that the Tibbetts case produced. Xavier Harrelson was a child who took care of his mother. He turned 11 during the search for him, his birthday passing while 500 people walked the countryside of Poweshiek County, calling his name. He had left home on a spring morning with no apparent reason to go anywhere he wouldn't return from, and the landscape kept him until the autumn. And the landscape gave him back only when it chose to. A child's bike near the edge of a 660-acre park at dusk. The same county, the same silence, the same open file. One county in central Iowa has now produced 2 searches of this scale in 3 years. Tibbetts in 2018, Harrelson in 2021. And one of those searches ended in a conviction, and one of them has not ended in anything yet. That is the map of Poweshiek County as it exists in the Iowa case record. 2 names, 2 summers, 2 sets of aerial footage of the same flat countryside, taken from drones that were looking for the same terrible thing. The corn and the farmland and the quiet county roads that connect Montezuma to Brooklyn absorbed both of them and returned them on their own schedule, indifferent to the scale of the effort deployed against the landscape's silence. Now the map shifts to the northeast corner of the state, to the bluffs and river valleys of Winneshiek County, where a 15-year-old girl disappeared from a rural farmstead in the spring of 2017, and where a man would eventually be convicted of her murder without a single piece of physical evidence that has ever been labeled. Her remains. A conviction without a body. A verdict without a grave. A killer, according to the jury, who reportedly said he would take the truth to his grave, and who has so far kept that promise in the most literal way available to him. Her name was Jade Marie Colvin, and she was 15 years old, and she has never been found. Decorah, Iowa, March 2017. Winneshiek County sits in the far northeastern corner of Iowa, a landscape that feels different from the flat central farmland of Poweshiek, rolling hills, limestone bluffs, the upper Iowa River cutting through wooded valleys. The kind of terrain that draws tourists in summer for its beauty, and that feels genuinely isolated in the late winter and early spring, when the trees are bare, and the roads between farmsteads are empty, and the distance between one house and the next can measure in miles rather than blocks. Decorah is the county seat, a college town of roughly 8,000 people, home to Luther College, with a downtown and a community infrastructure that coexists with the deep rural character of the surrounding county. The farmstead where Jade Colvin disappeared was not in Decorah proper. It was rural, isolated in the specific way that rural Winneshiek County properties can be isolated, sitting on land that belonged to a man named James David Bachmursky, who owned the property and who was, at the time, in a relationship with Jade's mother, LaDawn. Jade had recently returned from a period of living in Arizona, and she was staying at the farm for what was understood to be a short time. She was 15 years old. She was described by her family as bright, kind, full of potential, a young woman whose family said Bachmursky had taken advantage of her trust and her mother's connection to him, to place her in a situation of profound vulnerability on an isolated rural property in a northeastern Iowa winter. The last confirmed public sighting of Jade Colvin was March 29, 2017, at a Walmart store in Decorah. She was with Bachmursky. She was seen on surveillance footage at the store, in his presence, alive. That footage exists. That sighting is confirmed. It is the last confirmed record of Jade Colvin being alive and visible to the outside world. On March 30, 2017, Jade used Bachmursky's phone to send a text message. That text, sent from his device, on her behalf, on the morning of March 30th, is the last documented communication from Jade Colvin. After that text was sent, her digital presence ceased entirely. No further texts, no social media activity, no Instagram, no Facebook, no Snapchat platforms that a 15-year-old girl in 2017 would have been using regularly, reflexively, as part of the basic texture of daily life. The silence was not gradual. It was immediate and total, and that is the last confirmed time anyone had any contact with Jade Colvin. For a 15-year-old girl in 2017, a sudden and complete digital silence was not just unusual. It was, as investigators would later frame it, essentially impossible under normal circumstances. Think about what that means concretely. A teenager, in 2017, carried her social media presence the way previous generations carried a wallet, automatically, constantly, as a reflex. Every ordinary moment had a potential post attached to it. Every conversation with a friend happened partly through a screen. The idea of a 15-year-old girl simply stopping all of it, no likes, no messages, no story updates, no replies to friends who were almost certainly reaching out without any explanation or announcement or goodbye, and maintaining that silence, not for a day or two but permanently, crossing from March 30th forward without a single digital trace, is the kind of thing that, once you understand it, reframes everything else in the case. Detective Chris Webker, who worked the investigation, described it plainly. The total digital silence was extremely unusual. That is the careful language of law enforcement. What it means, stripped of that carefulness, is this: Jade Colvin did not go quiet. Something made her quiet, and the question of what and who is the spine of everything that followed. The immediate problem was that nobody raised the alarm in March 2017 with the urgency that the silence deserved. The circumstances around the farmstead were complicated, multiple people coming and going from the property, relationships that were difficult to map cleanly from the outside, a teenager whose living situation had already involved a move to Arizona and back in ways that might have made her trajectory seem less predictable to people who weren't paying close attention. Bakhmursky, who owned the property and was in a relationship with Jade's mother, was the last person confirmed to have been with Jade in public. He was present for the Walmart visit on March 29th. He was the owner of the phone from which Jade's last text was sent on March 30th. Here's the critical detail about what Bakhmursky did in the months that followed Jade's disappearance, because his behavior in that period became central to the investigation that would eventually catch up to him. In 2018, he sold his Decorah farmstead property, the land where Jade had been living, the last place she was known to have been. He switched his cell phone number. He sold his Ford Escape to a scrapyard, specifically arranging for the vehicle to be crushed. He deleted information about Jade from his old phone and left the device in storage at a neighbor's property. And then he left Iowa entirely, relocating to Georgia, where he began living under a different name, not his own name, not James David Bakhmursky, but a name he had chosen, Bob Sage. Now this is where the investigation turns, and where the specific behavior of a man trying to disappear himself into a new identity in a southern state begins to work against him rather than for him. A person who sells a farmstead, crushes a vehicle, deletes data from a stored phone, moves across the country, and adopts an alias, is a person who is doing the specific, purposeful work of creating distance between themselves and something they do not want to be asked about. Each of those actions, taken individually, might have an innocent explanation. Taken together, across a coherent timeline that began immediately after a 15-year-old girl went permanently silent, they form a pattern that investigators and prosecutors would later argue spoke directly to consciousness of guilt. The investigation moved slowly at first. Years passed. Jade remained officially missing, her case open but not generating the kind of sustained public attention that higher-profile cases command. It was not until May 2022, 5 years after Jade disappeared, that the Winneshiek County Sheriff's Office received information from the United States Marshal Service and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, indicating that Jade had not been seen or heard from after she arrived at Bakhmursky's farm. That information, arriving through federal channels 5 years after the fact, restarted the investigation with a new urgency. Investigators began building the case in earnest. They traced Bakhmursky to Georgia. They identified him despite the alias. They built a file that pulled together the physical evidence, or rather, the absence of it, which was itself a form of evidence. The testimony of witnesses who had been at or near the farm property in March 2017, the digital record that ended on March 30th, and the post-disappearance behavior of the man who had last been seen with Jade. Bakhmursky was located in Georgia and arrested. He was charged with second-degree murder in connection with Jade Colvin's disappearance. He was 66 years old at the time of his arrest. He was brought back to Iowa to face trial in Winneshiek County. The trial that followed was, in the precise technical sense, a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony because there was no body. Jade Colvin's remains have never been found. Extensive searches of the rural areas in and around Decorah, including the farmstead property that Bachmurski had sold in 2018, have not produced confirmed physical remains. Without a body, the prosecution faced the fundamental challenge that confronts every no-body murder case, proving beyond a reasonable doubt that a death occurred at all and that the defendant caused it. Without the most basic piece of physical evidence that murder trials typically rely on, the defense leaned into this directly. Bachmurski's attorneys argued that there was no proof Jade Colvin was even dead, that a missing teenager was not, by definition, a murder victim, and that the absence of a body meant the absence of a crime that could be proven. But here's what doesn't make sense about that defense argument when you lay it against the complete picture of what the evidence showed. Jade Colvin was 15 years old. She had family who loved her and who had been actively searching for information about her. She had friends. She had a digital life that had been active and ongoing right up to the moment it stopped. She had no established history of disappearing or cutting off contact voluntarily. She was last seen with one specific person on one specific date at a Walmart in Decorah, and that person subsequently sold the property where she had been living, crushed the vehicle he had been driving, deleted her information from his phone, moved to another state, and began living under an assumed name. The prosecution's argument was direct. Only one explanation fit the complete picture of that evidence. "We wish we had a body," prosecutors said during the trial. But all of the evidence is going to establish that there is only one person who could have caused the permanent disappearance of Jade Colvin, and that's the defendant. The witness testimony that supported the prosecution's case was, by accounts of the trial proceedings, inconsistent in places. Multiple individuals who had been present at or near the Bachmurski farmstead in March 2017 gave accounts that did not always align cleanly with each other. The kind of inconsistency that develops naturally over 5 years of memory decay and that defense attorneys exploit effectively in court. But investigators described a process in which those inconsistencies, examined carefully and cross-referenced against each other and against the physical and digital evidence, gradually resolved into a coherent picture rather than dissolving into reasonable doubt. The inconsistencies were the noise around a signal, and the signal was consistent. Jade was at the farm, Bachmurski was with her, and after March 30th, she was never seen or heard from again. The jury convicted James David Bachmurski of second-degree murder. A conviction without a body, a verdict without a grave. A jury of his peers in Winneshiek County, Iowa, looked at the complete picture: the digital silence, the crushed vehicle, the deleted phone data, the sold property, the assumed name in Georgia, the 5 years of running, the witness accounts, the absolute permanence of a 15-year-old girl's disappearance from every platform and every relationship she had ever occupied, and determined that James David Bachmurski was responsible for Jade Colvin's death. He did not provide a full account of what happened on that farm. Reports indicate that at some point he suggested he would take the truth to his grave. He has, so far, done exactly that. The farmstead has been searched. The surrounding rural terrain of Winneshiek County has been searched. Jade Marie Colvin has not been found. Her family has a conviction. They have a verdict. They have a name and a sentence attached to the disappearance of their daughter and sister and cousin. What they do not have, and what they may never have, is the thing that grief most specifically requires: a place, a location, a piece of ground they can stand on and say, "She was here, and we have her back." Bachmurski has that information, if he has it at all, locked behind whatever decision he made to take the truth to his grave. The jury's verdict does not unlock it. The sentence does not unlock it. The conviction is real, and it is meaningful, and it is, in the context of the other cases on this list, more than most families ever get. And it is also, at the same time, not enough. It will never be enough for this specific family, until someone can answer the question that the conviction leaves permanently open: where is Jade? A conviction without a body proves that Iowa can name a killer and still never find the victim. It proves that the legal system can reach a verdict and still leave a wound that the verdict cannot close. And it circles back, in a way that feels inevitable when you look at the complete map of these cases, to the pattern that has run through Iowa's missing persons history since 1979. The pattern of open questions, of partial answers, of case files that are technically closed, but that leave something permanently unresolved in the people who carry them. There are 2 boys whose names appear on milk cartons. There is a woman whose bent car key is still in evidence storage in Mason City. There are 2 cousins whose bikes are still the defining image of an unsolved case in Black Hawk County. There is a farmstead in Winneshiek County that has been searched and found empty. And there is a map of Iowa with 10 names on it, distributed across its geography, from the northeastern bluffs to the central flatlands to the interstate corridor, connected not by a single killer or a single setting or a single type of victim, but by a single, specific, terrible fact: that in each of these places, on an ordinary day, a person left where they were and did not arrive where they were going, and the space between those 2 points has never been fully explained. The final part of this map is not a new case. It is a return back to the blacktop, back to the cornfields, back to the place where this whole reckoning began, and to the pattern that ties every name on this list to every other one. Back to the question that the cold open asked over that drone shot of the Iowa countryside, and that 10 cases have not answered, and that the landscape itself seems determined to keep. Pull the map back out. Look at it whole. Start in the northeast corner, Winneshiek County, the limestone bluffs above Decorah, a rural farmstead where a 15-year-old girl's digital life went permanently dark on March 30th, 2017, and a man subsequently crushed his own vehicle and moved to Georgia under a different name. Move southwest to Black Hawk County, Evansdale, a recreational lake trail where 2 bikes and a pink purse marked the end of a summer afternoon for a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old who have never had their case solved. Move further southwest to Cerro Gordo County, Mason City, a dark apartment parking lot where a bent car key on wet pavement is the complete physical record of what happened to a television anchor on a June morning in 1995. Move down to Lynn County, Cedar Rapids, a mall parking lot in the week before Christmas where a 40-year forensic chase ended with a drinking straw and an exact match. Move to Polk County in the Des Moines Metro, 3 boys, 3 disappearances, 4 years, the same general residential geography, 0 arrests. Move to Poweshiek County in the center of the state, 2 searches, 2 summers, the same flat countryside and the same open sky, and the same question asked twice, 3 years apart. Add the highway, Interstate 80 cutting across the state's southern corridor, and the Iowa college student who broke down on the Illinois stretch of it and was found 500 miles away in Missouri. 10 cases, a geographic spread that covers the state, from the bluffs of the Northeast to the Central Farm Corridor, to the interstate, to the lake trail, to the suburban paper routes, to the mall. No single setting, no single type of victim, no single decade, no single pattern of perpetration that links them all into a clean, containable explanation. What they share is something more fundamental than setting or method. They share the specific, irreducible fact that the ordinary landscape of Iowa absorbed each of these people on an ordinary day and did not give them back with any adequate explanation. Let's spend this final accounting doing what the structure of the case-by-case reconstruction couldn't fully do, laying them against each other, seeing what the map reveals when you look at it as a whole rather than as 10 separate files. The first thing the map shows is a cluster that no honest account of Iowa's missing persons history can avoid. The Des Moines Metro, specifically the south and west sides, produced 3 disappearances of boys between 13 and 13 years old across a 4-year window from 1982 to 1986. Johnny Gosh, September 1982. West Des Moines, paper drop corner, blue car, stocky man, dog, comes home alone. Eugene Martin, August 1984, Des Moines South Side paper route, pre-dawn, 43 days after the law named for the first boy was signed. Mark Allen, March 1986. Des Moines, not a paperboy. Daylight. A short walk between two houses. Nothing left behind. 3 boys. Same city. Same era. No arrests in any of the 3 cases. Law enforcement has not officially connected them. Investigators have said, consistently, that a connection may never be established. John Walsh's stated belief that a serial predator was operating in that area remains exactly that. A stated belief, unconfirmed, belonging to the category of things that feel true from the outside and cannot be proven from the inside. What can be said plainly? If you were a boy between 10 and 13 years old, living in the Des Moines metro in the mid-1980s, doing the ordinary things that boys did, paper routes, walks to friends' houses, pre-dawn suburban mornings, you were in the same geography as 3 disappearances that remain unsolved. The Johnny Gosch bill changed the institutional response. It did not change the outcome for Eugene Martin, who disappeared 43 days after it was signed. It did not change the outcome for Mark Allen, who disappeared 2 years after that. Legislation can close an institutional gap. It cannot close the gap between a boy leaving his front door and a boy never arriving at his destination. The second thing the map shows is the specific terror of public spaces. Jody Weisentraut was taken from a residential apartment parking lot less than a mile from her workplace in a city of 30,000 people. Michelle Martinko was killed in a mall parking lot during the busiest shopping week of the year. Both locations were, in the abstract, surrounded by other people. Both locations were, in the specific pre-dawn or late evening hours when the events occurred, effectively empty of useful witnesses. The parking lot at night is its own kind of isolation, a lit space that creates the illusion of visibility, while the actual geography of parked vehicles and low foot traffic makes it as private as a rural road. Jody's bent car key is the record of how fast that illusion dissolves. Michelle's untouched $186 is the record of how personal violence can be in a space that feels public. The third thing the map shows is the role of landscape as concealment. Molly Tibbetts was jogging on an open road with corn 8 feet high on both sides, and a car followed her for blocks without being reported by a single witness, and her body was hidden in a field that searchers didn't reach for 34 days. Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins left their bikes on a public recreational trail and were not found for 5 months, discovered by hunters in a wildlife area 20 miles from where their bikes were lying. Xavier Harrelson's remains were in the countryside, northwest of Montezuma, while 500 volunteers and heat-sensing drones searched the area for months. The Iowa landscape, the corn, the woodland, the drainage ditches, the creek beds, the wildlife areas. The vast agricultural geometry of the central counties is not incidentally good at concealing things. It is structurally, specifically, almost perfectly designed for it. The rows run for miles. The growth is dense for half the year. The rural road network connects isolated points through corridors where a car can travel for 20 minutes without passing another vehicle. It is beautiful, and it is fertile, and it is one of the most effectively concealing landscapes in the American Midwest. And every case on this list that involves a rural or semi-rural setting reflects that fact. The fourth thing the map shows is the long game of forensic science and what it costs to play it. Michelle Martinko's killer walked free for 39 years because DNA profiling didn't exist in 1979, because the first database search in 2006 found no match, because genetic genealogy as a forensic tool wasn't refined enough to be useful until the mid-2010s. Jade Colvin's case went 5 years without the urgency it deserved, and the man investigators believe killed her spent those 5 years building a new identity in another state. The science got there eventually in both cases, a drinking straw in 2018, a federal referral in 2022. But the distance between crime occurs and science catches up is measured in decades and in the specific, uncountable cost to the families who live inside that distance. The fifth thing, and this one is the quietest and the most persistent, is what the open cases reveal about the limits of everything we have built to prevent and solve exactly these kinds of disappearances. The Johnny Gosch bill was landmark legislation. It changed how Iowa, and eventually the country, responded to missing children. It was 43 days old when Eugene Martin disappeared. The FBI's involvement in the Cook and Collins case brought resources and expertise that dwarfed what local agencies could deploy. It did not produce an arrest. The 500-person search for Xavier Harrelson used technology that didn't exist during any of the 1980s cases. It found him months later, in the landscape, after he was already gone. The institutional responses have improved, genuinely and significantly, across the 40-plus years that this list spans. The outcomes have not improved with perfect consistency. Some of the open cases on this list, Gosh, Martin, Allen, Huisentrut, Cook and Collins, Zywicki, remain open not because investigators stopped trying, but because the gap between what happened and what can be proven is a gap that effort alone cannot always close. Here's the critical detail that ties all 10 cases together in a way that no single case can convey on its own. In each of these situations, there was a moment, a specific, real, measurable moment when the person was present and then was not. Johnny Gosh was at the paper drop corner talking to a man by a blue car, and then he wasn't. Jody Huisentrut was on the phone at 4 in the morning saying she was on her way, and then she wasn't. Lyric and Elizabeth were on a bike trail at noon on a July Friday, and then their bikes were there and they weren't. Molly Tibbetts was running the blacktop at a 10-minute mile, and then her phone was moving at 60 miles an hour, and then it stopped. In each case, the moment of transition, the actual instant in which a person became a missing person, happened in the space of seconds, in the ordinary geography of an ordinary day, without leaving a record that was sufficient to explain it. The gap is always the same gap. The shape of it changes: pre-dawn suburb, parking lot, bike trail, jogging road, highway shoulder, farmstead, but the fundamental structure is identical. Present, then not. And the space in between is where every investigation has to work, and where most of them have found only partial answers or none at all. The final case on this list isn't a case at all, in one sense. It's the thing that every case on this list points toward when you follow the thread back to its beginning. We started in Poweshiek County, with Molly Tibbetts on the blacktop, corn 8 feet high on both sides, a phone moving at 60 miles per hour toward a silence that lasted 34 days. We end in Poweshiek County, with Xavier Harrelson leaving Spruce Village on his bike on a May morning. The same flat land, the same sky, the same open country that looks like you can see everything and conceals everything equally well. 2 cases, 1 county, one resolved with a conviction, one resolved only with remains and no accountability. The county seat of Poweshiek County is Montezuma, the same Montezuma where Xavier lived, the same landscape where Molly was found. That geography holds 2 of the 10 names on this list, and it holds them in a way that refuses to become metaphor or symbol or lesson. It is simply a place where 2 terrible things happened, 3 years apart, and where the fields and the roads and the flat horizon look exactly the same today as they did on both of those mornings. This is where the final accounting has to happen. Not in a courtroom, not in a case file, but on the map itself. 10 names distributed across Iowa's geography, 10 ordinary days that ended without adequate explanation, 10 families carrying the specific weight of cases that are either legally resolved and emotionally open, or legally open and emotionally unresolvable. The last part of this is the echo, the thing the map says when you stop adding to it and just look at what's there. There is a specific quality to the silence that follows a case that has no resolution, and it is different from the silence that follows a case that does. The Martinko case has a silence to it, a closed file quiet, the sound of a verdict delivered and a sentence imposed, and a door shut on the worst of the open questions. It is not a comfortable silence. 39 years of a killer living freely is not erased by a conviction in 2020. And the silence of those 39 years sits inside the resolution in a way that the verdict cannot fully absorb. But it is a different quality of silence from the one that surrounds Jody Huisentrut's bent key in a Mason City evidence room, or the one that surrounds the undelivered Sunday papers still metaphorically sitting in Johnny Gosh's wagon, or the one that surrounds 2 children's bikes on the edge of a drained lake in Black Hawk County. Those silences are still open. They are the sound of a question that has been asked for decades and has not been answered, and they carry a specific frequency that the resolved cases, for all their own weight and grief, do not. Let's be precise about where things stand, because precision is what the people who carry these cases deserve. 6 of the 10 cases on this list remain officially unsolved. Johnny Gosch, last confirmed at a paper drop corner in West Des Moines on September 5, 1982. Over 40 years ago. No arrests, no charges, officially open. Eugene Martin, last confirmed on his Des Moines paper route on August 12, 1984. 40 years ago. No arrests, no confirmed connection to the Gosch case, officially open. Mark Allen, last confirmed leaving his Des Moines home on March 29, 1986, 38 years ago. No arrests, no physical evidence trail in the public record, officially open. Jody Huizentrout, last confirmed on a phone call at 4 in the morning on June 27, 1995, nearly 30 years ago. No arrests, persons of interest, never charged. Officially open, never found. Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins, last confirmed on a Myers Lake bike trail on July 13, 2012. 12 years ago. No arrests, no charges. Bodies found in Bremer County, but case of who is responsible, officially open. Tammy Zywicki, last confirmed on an Interstate 80 shoulder in Illinois on August 23, 1992, 32 years ago. A multi-state task force that produced no charges, officially unsolved. 6 files, 6 sets of families, 6 sets of unanswered questions that have been carried across decades with the particular endurance that grief demands when it has no endpoint. Each of those families has lived through the entire arc of what an unsolved case does to the people at its center. The initial horror and mobilization, the active search phase with its fragile hope, the gradual scaling back as leads dry up and resources are redirected, the anniversaries, the periodic media attention when a case gets a renewed look or a new investigative technology is applied, the slow accretion of years that turns a missing person into a cold case, and a cold case into a piece of state history without ever turning it into an answer. That arc is long and it is brutal, and it is, for the families of the 6 open cases on this list, still ongoing. 4 of the 10 cases reached some form of resolution, and the nature of those resolutions is worth examining carefully because they are not all the same kind of resolution. Molly Tibbetts was found 34 days after she disappeared, and the person responsible for her death was identified, charged, tried, and convicted. The case is closed in the fullest sense that the legal system can close a case. Her family has a verdict, a sentence, an account of what happened that is as complete as the justice system can make it. It is the most complete resolution on this list, and it is still, by any human measure, a devastating outcome. A 20-year-old psychology student who went for a jog and never came home, a family that lost her, a community that searched for her, a cornfield in Poweshiek County that held her for 34 days. Completeness of resolution and adequacy of outcome are not the same thing. They never are in cases like these. Michelle Martinko's case is resolved in the same legal sense: convicted, sentenced, file closed. But the 39 years between the crime and the conviction are a specific kind of distance that the resolution cannot collapse. Jerry Burns lived a full adult life. He raised children. He ran a business. He was a respected member of a community. For 39 years, he carried the knowledge of what he had done in that mall parking lot, and it did not destroy him the way it destroyed Michelle Martinko's family. The conviction arrived exactly on the anniversary of the crime, as though the calendar had been waiting. That precision is real and documented and feels, from the outside, like something like the case asserting its own terrible symmetry. It does not restore the 39 years. It does not restore Michelle. Xavier Harrelson's case occupies a different category from either Tibbetts or Martinko. His remains were found. His identity was confirmed. The case moved from missing to recovered in the biological sense. But the circumstances of his death, and the question of whether anyone will be held accountable for what happened to him, remain publicly unresolved in a way that places his file in a liminal space between the resolved and the open cases. He was found. The person or circumstances responsible for why he was found, where and how he was found, have not been publicly accounted for with charges or an arrest. His family has remains. They do not yet have, in the public record, a conviction. Jade Colvin's case produced a conviction without remains. It is the mirror image of Xavier's outcome. There is a verdict, There is a sentence. There is a man in prison for her death. And there is no body, no confirmed location, no physical grave that her family can visit. The conviction without a body is one of the most difficult outcomes the legal system can produce for a family, because it answers the question of who and leaves the question of where permanently open. Bakhmursky reportedly said he would take the truth to his grave. He has so far kept that position. The searches of the Winneshiek County terrain around the former farmstead have not produced Jade's remains. The verdict exists. Jade does not exist in any locatable physical sense, and until someone provides information about where her remains are, that absence will continue alongside the conviction as the complete, irresolvable shape of her case. Now this is where the map asks its final question, and it is not a comfortable one. 10 cases across 4 decades, 4 that reached legal resolution of some kind, 6 that remain open. What does the pattern of the open cases tell us about the specific geography and infrastructure of Iowa that allowed them to remain open? Because it is not a random distribution, the open cases are concentrated in specific settings and specific eras that reveal something about the conditions under which disappearances become permanent mysteries. The 3 Des Moines paperboy cases, Gosh, Martin, Allen, are open because they occurred in an era before DNA profiling, before centralized missing persons databases, before the mandatory immediate response that the Gosh bill itself established in a setting where the primary evidence was human witness accounts of pre-dawn suburban scenes that were inherently low in witness traffic. The perpetrator, or perpetrators, if they were ever caught, would have been caught in those first days and weeks when the trail was fresh, and those first days and weeks were lost to the runaway assumption, to the 72-hour delay, to the institutional framework that treated missing children as probable runaways rather than probable victims of crime. By the time the response was appropriately urgent, the trail had cooled to the point where it could no longer be reliably followed. Jody Huisentrut's case is open because a pre-dawn abduction in a residential parking lot without surveillance cameras in 1995 left a physical evidence record that was rich enough to establish that an abduction had occurred, but not rich enough to establish who had committed it. The palm print, the bent key, the scream, these are the record of violence, not the record of a perpetrator. The persons of interest identified over 30 years have not been charged because the evidence, however suggestive it may be in the minds of investigators, has not reached the threshold required for prosecution. The case exists in the space between "we know something happened here" and "we can prove who did it in court," and that space, in the absence of new evidence, may be permanent. The Cook and Collins case is open because whatever happened on that bike trail on July 13, 2012, left no physical evidence connecting a specific individual to the crime. 2 children disappeared from a public recreational trail in daylight and were found 5 months later, 20 miles away. And the transition between those 2 points, the trail, the abduction, the transport, the location where they were ultimately found, produced nothing that has been turned into a charge. The case has every element that should produce a resolution. FBI involvement, hundreds of investigators, thousands of tips, a clear crime scene location, recovered remains, forensic examination. What it does not have is a name, and without a name it cannot have a verdict. Tammy Zywicki's case is open because an institutional failure in the first 24 hours cost the investigation the physical evidence that a promptly processed vehicle might have provided, and because the trucking community that investigators focused on as the most probable source of a suspect is one of the most geographically mobile populations in the country, a community of people whose job is to move through multiple states and jurisdictions, and whose routes are difficult to reconstruct days or weeks after the fact. The multi-state task force worked for years. The leads dried up. The case went cold in the specific way that cases go cold when the physical evidence was not preserved and the witness accounts are too limited to carry the weight of a prosecution. What ties all 6 open cases together is not a single failure or a single setting, but a combination of era, evidence, preservation, witness availability, and the specific, irreducible difficulty of proving what happened in the gap between presence and absence when the gap itself left no adequate record. The cases that were solved tidbits by surveillance footage and cell data Martinko by preserved biological evidence and genetic genealogy, Harrelson by the recovery of remains were solved because something in the gap left a traceable record. The cases that remain open are the cases where the gap was clean, where the transition from present to absent happened without leaving enough of itself behind to be followed to a conclusion. Here's the critical detail that the map reveals when you look at all 10 cases together. Iowa did not fail these people through indifference. The Gosh bill was passed. The FBI was called in. The searches were massive. The forensic technology was applied as it became available. The investigators, in case after case, spent years and decades on files that the institutional logic of resource allocation would have long since allowed them to deprioritize. The failures that occurred, the 72-hour delay in 1982, the abandoned car treated as a non-emergency in 1992, the 5-year gap before federal attention reached Jade Colvin's case in 2022 were real and consequential, and in some cases unforgivable in their impact on specific investigations. But they were not the complete explanation for why 6 cases remain open. The complete explanation includes the landscape, the era, the setting, the physics of evidence preservation, and the fundamental difficulty of reconstructing a moment that happened in seconds and left almost nothing behind. The final echo is not a lesson. It is not a call to action or a policy argument or a comfort. It is the map held up against the light with 10 names on it and their locations marked, and the specific shape of what those 10 locations reveal about a state and a century, and the ordinary days that ended without explanation in each of them. Lock your doors, pull up the map, and understand that the map is not a historical artifact. The cases that are open right now, today, in real time, in the real geography of Iowa, in the real files of real investigators who have not stopped working them. The bent key is in an evidence room in Mason City. The wagon full of Sunday papers is the permanent image of a West Des Moines cul-de-sac in September 1982. The bikes are on the edge of a trail in Evansdale in every photograph that the case has produced, and in every photograph they will ever produce. The farmstead in Winneshiek County has been searched and found empty. The blacktop in Poweshiek County runs through corn that is 8 feet high for half the year, and that concealed everything it was asked to conceal without any effort at all. 10 names, 10 places, 10 ordinary days. Not all of them came home. Come back to the beginning. Come back to the drone shot, the aerial view of Iowa that the cold open asked you to hold in your mind while 10 cases played out beneath it. The endless cornfields catching the last of the afternoon light. The lonely blacktop road running straight through the flat geometry of Poweshiek County until it disappears at the horizon. The grain silos standing at the edge of a farmstead, weathered and permanent. The kind of structure that outlasts the people who built it by generations. The one porch light burning in the dusk, a single warm point in the cooling gray of a rural Iowa evening. The light that means someone is home and someone is expected back. That image was the promise at the start of this. 10 names, 10 quiet Iowa towns. Not all of them came home. The porch light is the thing that makes that promise specific rather than abstract. It is the light that someone left on for a person who was expected home before dark, who didn't come back before dark, who didn't come back at all. Every case on this list has a version of that light. Noreen Gosh leaving the porch light on in West Des Moines on a September Sunday morning in 1982, waiting for a boy who was already gone before the neighborhood woke up, who had taken the family dog and his wagon of papers and walked into a pre-dawn suburban street and had not come back. The KIMT studio in Mason City lit up for a morning news broadcast that its anchor would never reach. The producer calling the apartment one more time and getting no answer. The on-air clock moving toward broadcast time, while a parking lot a mile away held everything that was left. A grandmother's house in Evansdale, with 2 empty bike spots in the driveway, as the July afternoon stretched into evening, and the phone calls started, and the trail beside Myers Lake held 2 bikes and a pink purse, and nothing else. A college campus in Grinnell, with a dormitory room prepared for a senior who was driving toward it on an August interstate, and would never arrive, her car already towed from an Illinois highway shoulder, while her mother's call sat in a police log as a non-urgent report. A family in Montezuma watching the clock pass noon, then 1 o'clock, then 2, then making the call that launched the largest search Poweshiek County had seen since Molly Tibbetts 3 years before. The porch light is not metaphor. It is the specific, physical object of waiting, the thing you leave on when you expect someone back and refuse to accept, for as long as the light burns, that they are not coming. Let's do the final accounting now, case by case, in the order the map presents them, and let the weight of each one land before moving to the next. Molly Tibbetts, Brooklyn, Iowa, July 18, 2018. A 20-year-old psychology student put her phone on Do Not Disturb and went for a jog on the blacktop. Her phone moved at a 10-minute mile until 8:28 p.m., sat still for 4 minutes, then moved south at 60 miles per hour and went dark at 8:53. She was found in a Poweshiek County cornfield 34 days later. Surveillance footage had shown a car following her on her route. A man is serving a life sentence for her murder. The cornfield is still there. The blacktop is still there. The corn grows back every year to the same height, pressing in from both sides of that road, and it keeps its secrets the same way it always has. Johnny Gosch, West Des Moines, September 5, 1982. A 12-year-old boy took the family dachshund and his wagon of Sunday papers and walked to the drop corner before sunrise. A witness saw him talking to a stocky man by a blue two-toned car parked near the paper drop. No plate was captured. The dog came home alone, navigating the familiar suburban streets back to the front door without the boy who had brought her out. The wagon, full of undelivered Sunday papers, sat 2 blocks from the Gosch home. The 72-hour institutional delay cost the investigation ground it never recovered. Johnny has been gone for over 40 years. No arrests, no charges, officially open. Jody Huizentrout, Mason City, June 27, 1995. A television anchor answered her producer's call at 4:00 a.m., said she was on her way, and walked downstairs and out to the parking lot of her apartment building less than a mile from the station. Her red high heels were found on the pavement. Her car key was bent on the ground, not dropped. Bent, the deformation of a struggle measured in seconds. A palm print was on the car. A scream was heard by someone in the area and not reported in time to matter. She has been missing for nearly 30 years. Thousands of tips, more than 1,000 interviews, persons of interest identified and never charged, never found, officially open. Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins, Evansdale, July 13, 2012. 2 cousins rode their bikes to Myers Lake on a summer Friday afternoon, leaving their grandmother's house at noon in the ordinary way of cousins, spending a summer together in a town where they were known and where they belonged. Their bikes were found at the trail's edge in the southeast corner of the lake. A pink purse was on the ground beside them. The FBI was called in. The lake was drained completely and found empty. The search ran for 5 months. Their remains were found on December 5, 2012, by hunters moving through Seven Bridges Wildlife Area in rural Bremer County, 20 miles from where their bikes were lying. No arrests, no charges. The person or persons who were on that trail on July 13th have never been identified, officially unsolved. Eugene Martin, Des Moines, South Side, August 12, 1984. A 13-year-old paperboy left his house at 5 in the morning to deliver his route. 43 days after the Johnny Gosch bill passed specifically because of what happened to another paperboy in the same city 2 years earlier, was signed into Iowa law. He did not complete his route. He did not come home. His face joined Johnny Gosch's on milk cartons distributed to breakfast tables across the country. 2 boys from the same city staring out from between the cereal and the orange juice. He has been gone for 40 years. No arrests, no confirmed connection to the Gosch case established in the official record. Both boys presumed dead by authorities. Officially open. Tammy Zywicki, Interstate 80, LaSalle County, Illinois, en route to Grinnell College, Iowa. August 23, 1992. A 21-year-old Grinnell senior's car broke down on the highway shoulder on a busy Sunday afternoon. A witness saw a tractor-trailer parked near her disabled Pontiac between 3:10 and 4:00 p.m. Her car was ticketed for abandonment and towed the following day without being treated as a crime scene. The disappearance was not seriously investigated for several days after her mother first reported her missing. 9 days later, her body was found along Interstate 44 in Lawrence County, Missouri, nearly 500 miles from the Illinois breakdown site. She had been stabbed to death, her body wrapped and bound. Her Canon camera and her Loris wristwatch were never recovered. A 14-investigator multi-state task force worked the case for years. No arrests, no charges. Officially unsolved. Mark Allen, Des Moines. March 29, 1986. A 13-year-old boy told his mother he was walking to a friend's house down the street. It was the day before Easter, a spring afternoon in a residential neighborhood where he was known. The distance between his front door and his destination was short enough to cover in 2 minutes. He never arrived at the friend's house. He never came home. He left behind no physical evidence trail, no confirmed witness account of an encounter on that sidewalk. Nothing except the absence of a child from a walk so short it should have been impossible to disappear on. He is the third boy from the same general Des Moines geography across a 4-year span. Officially open. Michelle Martinko. Cedar Rapids. December 19, 1979. An 18-year-old singer and theater student drove her parents' tan Buick Electra to the Westdale Mall after a choir banquet to buy a winter coat. She carried $186. She was seen inside the mall that evening. She was found in the family's car in the parking lot. Her money was untouched. Blood evidence from the scene was preserved through 4 decades until genetic genealogy matched it to a man who had spent 39 years living an ordinary life in a small Iowa community, a business owner, a husband, a father, a neighbor, while Michelle Martinko's family carried an open wound. Jerry Lynn Burns was arrested on December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day, and convicted of first-degree murder in 2020, sentenced to life without parole. The only case on this list where a killer lived visibly among the community for decades before science found him. Case closed. Xavier Harrelson, Montezuma, May 27, 2021. A 10-year-old boy who acted as a caretaker for his mother left home on his bike at approximately 11 in the morning, heading in an unknown direction. 500 volunteers, fixed-wing aircraft, heat-sensing drones, and a dive team searched Poweshiek County across weeks and months. Human remains were found northwest of Montezuma, the clothing matching the red t-shirt, blue pajama pants, and black high-top shoes Xavier had been wearing, confirmed as Xavier Harrelson. He turned 11 years old during the search for him, his birthday passing while the countryside that held him was being walked in grids by people calling his name. The circumstances of his death have not been publicly resolved with charges or an arrest. The file sits in a category of its own, found but not answered. Jade Marie Colvin, rural Decorah, Winneshiek County. March 2017. A 15-year-old girl was last seen publicly on surveillance footage at a Walmart in Decorah on March 29th, in the presence of James David Bachmursky. She sent a text from his phone on March 30th. After that, her digital presence, every platform, every message thread, every social media account that a 15-year-old in 2017 would have maintained as a reflex of daily life, went permanently and completely silent. Bachmursky subsequently sold the farmstead, crushed his Ford Escape at a scrapyard, deleted her information from his stored phone, relocated to Georgia, and began living under the name Bob Sage. He was located, arrested, tried, and convicted of second-degree murder by a Winneshiek County jury. He reportedly said he would take the truth to his grave. Jade Colvin has never been found. The searches of the rural terrain around the former farmstead have not produced her remains. The verdict exists. She does not exist in any locatable physical sense, and that gap between conviction and recovery is where her family lives. Here's the final critical detail, and it is the one that the entire structure of this video has been building toward without quite saying directly. The open cases are not historical. They are not sealed in amber, preserved as artifacts of a finished era. They are active. The investigators working the Huisentrut case in Mason City are working it right now, in 2024, nearly 30 years after that parking lot. The FBI's involvement in the Cook and Collins case has not ended. The Des Moines paperboy cases, Gosh, Martin, Allen, are in active files that have not been closed and are not being closed. Tammy Zywicki's family has not stopped. The open cases on this list are being carried, right now, by real people, investigators, family members, advocates, the communities where these disappearances happened, who have not accepted the silence as a final answer, and who understand that cold cases are solved, sometimes after decades. When a piece of evidence surfaces or a technology matures, or someone who has been holding a secret decides they can no longer hold it. The porch light is still on. That is not a poetic device. It is the literal, operational fact of what an open missing persons case means for the people who hold it: a refusal to turn the light off, a refusal to accept that the person who was expected home is not coming, a refusal to let the case become simply history when it is still, in its unresolved form, the present tense of someone's life. Jerry Burns was convicted 39 years after he killed Michelle Martinko because preserved blood and a discarded straw and a science that didn't exist in 1979 finally connected 2 points across 4 decades. That is not an argument for patience. It is an argument for the possibility that the open cases on this list have not exhausted what is findable. The gap has not permanently won. The cold open asked you to lock your doors. Here, at the end of the map, that instruction lands differently than it did at the start. It is not a thriller's reflexive warning. It is the acknowledgement that the geography where these things happened is the same geography that exists today. The same blacktop roads, the same parking lots, the same bike trails beside the same lakes, the same pre-dawn suburban streets where paperboys still deliver papers in the dark, the same interstate shoulders where cars still break down and strangers still pull over, the same isolated rural farmsteads in the limestone hills of the Northeast. The landscape has not changed. The corn grows back to the same height every summer. The porch lights burn at dusk in Brooklyn and Montezuma and West Des Moines and Mason City and Evansdale and Cedar Rapids. And somewhere in that landscape, in files that are active and open and being worked by people who have not given up, the answers to 6 of the 10 cases on this list are still waiting to be found. A little red wagon full of undelivered Sunday papers on a West Des Moines sidewalk before sunrise. 2 bikes on their sides at the edge of a recreational trail in Evansdale. A bent car key on wet pavement in a Mason City parking lot in the dark before dawn. A phone going silent at 8:53 p.m., 15 miles south of a small Iowa town, somewhere in a Poweshiek County cornfield, in the August dark. 10 names, 10 ordinary days. The map is still open.